Welcome back to the channel where we remember the women who once lit up the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. Today, we take a quiet and emotional look at a rare kind of loss, the passing of women who lived past 100. These weren't just long lives, they were full ones, stretched across decades of love, work, pain, and change. They saw the world shift in ways most of us can only read about, and through it all, they held on with strength, with grace, and often with silence. Some passed away in care homes, others surrounded by fading memories or the stillness of old age. Their names may not be in the spotlight anymore, but their impact still lingers. These women weren't just actresses or artists, they were history in motion. And even though their time here lasted more than a century, it still hurts to say goodbye. Today, we remember their final moments, their long journeys, and the quiet dignity with which they left this world behind. Today, we remember Priscilla Pointer, a gifted American actress who quietly passed away in her sleep on April 28, 2025, at the age of 100, just weeks before her 101st birthday. She died of natural causes at an assisted living facility in Ridgefield, Connecticut, with her family confirming that her final moments were peaceful. Her daughter, actress Amy Irving, shared a heartfelt tribute, saying she hoped her mom had run off with her two beloved husbands and their many dogs, a line that somehow makes the loss feel even heavier. Priscilla's last days were calm, surrounded by the people who loved her. But there's still something incredibly sad about seeing someone so full of life, who spent 8 decades breathing soul into every stage and screen she stepped on, slowly fade from this world. Born on May 18, 1924, in New York City to artist parents, Priscilla grew up surrounded by creativity and emotion, something that stayed with her throughout her long life. Her journey began on the theater stage in the late 1940s, working on powerful productions like A Streetcar Named Desire, Yerma, and The Condemned of Altona. She co-founded the San Francisco Actors Workshop alongside her husband Jules Irving, and together they built not just theater but a legacy. After stepping back for a time to raise their 3 children, she returned to acting in her 40s and soon made a name for herself in television and film. She appeared in dozens of TV shows including The Rockford Files, Judging Amy, and LA Law. But most fans will remember her as Rebecca Barnes Wentworth on the hit series Dallas, where she played the elegant and tragic mother figure with such quiet power. On the big screen, she left her mark in iconic roles like the mother in Carrie, where she acted alongside her real-life daughter Amy Irving, and memorable appearances in Blue Velvet, Mommy Dearest, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, and The Falcon and the Snowman. She often played mothers, teachers, or judges, roles that demanded a kind of strength and honesty that came naturally to her. But behind the strong screen presence was a woman who had seen great love and loss. Her first husband, Jules, died of a heart attack in 1979, and her second husband, actor Robert Simmons, passed away in 2007. Yet she carried on with grace, acting well into her 90s, with her final role being a voice performance in 2008. Her death wasn't sudden, but it still leaves behind a silence that's hard to fill. Living to 100 is rare, but what's even more rare is a life so fully lived, as a wife, a mother, a performer, and a pioneer. She was one of the last living links to a golden age of American theater and television, and her absence is deeply felt. Priscilla Pointer didn't chase fame. She chased truth in the characters she played, and that's why she mattered. Not just as Amy Irving's mother or a familiar face from the 80s, but as someone who gave herself completely to the work. Her death marks the end of an era, and for those who watched her, knew her, or worked with her, it truly feels like saying goodbye to someone who made the world a little more human. Ellen Albertini Dow, the unforgettable American actress best known for her hilarious and heartwarming role as the rapping grandmother in The Wedding Singer. She passed away on May 4, 2015, at the age of 101, after a battle with pneumonia. In her final days, Ellen was in Los Angeles, the city where she had spent decades shaping young actors and performing in front of millions. Her passing was quiet, but deeply felt by those who had admired her strength, energy, and charm. She lived a long life, but even that wasn't enough to match the amount of joy she gave to the world. Born on November 16, 1913, in Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania, she was the youngest of 7 children raised by Italian immigrant parents. From the age of 5, she studied dance and piano, unknowingly laying the foundation for a life full of creativity and expression. Ellen went on to earn both a BA and MA in theater from Cornell University, an incredible achievement for a woman in that era. After moving to New York City, she studied under greats like Martha Graham and Marcel Marceau before eventually making her way to Los Angeles with her husband, Eugene Dow. For decades, she taught drama and dance, inspiring countless students at Los Angeles City College and Pierce College. But it wasn't until her 70s that Ellen became a familiar face on screen. She made her first film appearance in 1985 and quickly found herself cast in over 30 TV shows and movies, playing unforgettable roles like Disco Dottie in 54, Mary Cleary in Wedding Crashers, and appearances in Sister Act, Seinfeld, Scrubs, and even Hannah Montana. Despite being small in height, standing just 4'11", Ellen had a larger-than-life presence. Her energy, even in her 80s and 90s, could light up a room. She famously did the actual rapping herself in The Wedding Singer, a performance that surprised everyone, including the director, who didn't expect it to come so naturally to her. Ellen's final years were spent quietly, continuing to work into her late 90s with appearances on New Girl and Family Guy, still surprising audiences with her spark. She lost her beloved husband in 2004 and had no children, but left behind a massive family of students, fans, and fellow performers who saw her not just as a quirky grandma on screen, but as a woman who lived fully, taught selflessly, and aged with grace, fire, and a love for art. Her death from pneumonia was a peaceful end to a long, colorful, and impactful life. She's buried in her hometown of Mount Carmel, Pennsylvania, next to her husband, closing a story that began in a small town and reached screens all over the world. Ellen Albertini Dow didn't just play feisty grandmas, she was one. Fierce, funny, and full of life until the very end. Madeleine Riffaud, a fearless French poet, journalist, and resistance fighter, who passed away on November 6, 2024, at the age of 100 in her Paris apartment after a life marked by war, trauma, courage, and unwavering defiance. In her final days, Madeleine remained quiet and private, blind and confined to her home, still haunted by the horrors of torture and loss she had witnessed 8 decades earlier. Her passing was peaceful, but behind it was a century of unimaginable pain and resilience, much of it beginning when she was just a teenager. At only 16, a violent kick from a German officer in a crowded railway station changed the course of her life forever, igniting a rage inside her that would lead her to the French resistance. By 18, after surviving tuberculosis in a sanatorium, she joined the communist-affiliated resistance group FTP under the name Rener, inspired by the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Her most defining act came on July 23, 1944, when she calmly approached a Nazi officer on a bridge in Paris and shot him twice in the head, right as he admired the Seine. She tried to escape on her bicycle, but was caught by a French collaborator who rammed into her with his car and handed her to the Gestapo for a bounty. What followed was 3 weeks of unthinkable torture. She was whipped, electrocuted, half-drowned, and denied food, water, and sleep, yet she never gave up a single name. Scheduled to be executed on August 5th, she was saved at the last moment, only to be tortured for another 10 days. Even when she tried to escape from a train headed to Ravensbrück concentration camp, she was recaptured, but finally released in a prisoner exchange. Just days later, she returned to fight, leading a mission that captured a Nazi train and 80 German soldiers before Paris was liberated. After the war, she spiraled into depression, but her poetry, some of it written in her prison cell, became her outlet. With support from surrealist legends like Paul Éluard and Pablo Picasso, she published her first collection, Le Poing Firme, and began a career in journalism. She became known for her bold reporting from Vietnam and Algeria, living for years among the Viet Cong and barely surviving an ambush in Algeria that left her injured and partially blind. Her work wasn't just about war, it was about truth, about giving voice to the tortured, the occupied, and the forgotten. She lost her daughter Fabienne to tuberculosis, the same illness she had once fought herself, and that grief stayed with her always. Despite moving away from politics in her later years, she never stopped writing and never stopped remembering. On her 100th birthday, the final volume of her memoir was released, closing a chapter on a life that was anything but ordinary. Madeleine Riffaud didn't just survive history, she helped shape it, and her death marks the end of a voice that never stopped fighting, no matter how heavy the silence around her became. Olivia de Havilland, a legendary actress from the golden age of Hollywood, whose life came to a peaceful close on July 26, 2020, when she died in her sleep at her longtime home in Paris at the age of 104 from natural causes. Her death marked the end of a remarkable era. She was the last living major star from the classic film Gone with the Wind, and the oldest surviving Oscar winner. In her final years, Olivia lived quietly in the city she'd called home for over 6 decades, far from the lights of Hollywood, but still surrounded by memories of a career that changed film history. She had once said the secret to her long life was love, laughter, and learning, and even at 100, she still read scripture at church and greeted reporters with a teasing smile. But the last few years weren't without pain. She lost her son Benjamin in 1991 to complications from Hodgkin's disease, and her ex-husband Pierre Galani to cancer in 1998. By the time Olivia passed away, nearly all of her contemporaries, including her sister Joan Fontaine, with whom she had a famously bitter and lifelong feud, had already gone. Born in Tokyo in 1916 to British parents, Olivia's childhood was shaped by family struggle. Her father left them, and her stepfather was stern, but her mother encouraged a love of reading, acting, and the arts. After moving to California, Olivia's passion for theater led her to a chance role in A Midsummer Night's Dream, which catapulted her into the film world. She quickly rose to stardom alongside Errol Flynn in swashbuckling adventures like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood. But it was her role as the kind-hearted Melanie in Gone with the Wind that made her unforgettable. Behind her graceful image, Olivia was a fighter. She took on Warner Bros. in a brutal legal battle in 1943 when they tried to extend her contract unfairly. Her victory changed Hollywood forever and became known as the de Havilland Law, giving actors more freedom and control. In the 1940s, she won 2 Academy Awards, first for To Each His Own, then for The Heiress, proving she was more than just a pretty face. She played women with depth, trauma, and strength, including a mentally ill patient in The Snake Pit and twins with opposite personalities in The Dark Mirror. She acted in nearly 50 films, appeared on Broadway and television, and even became the first female president of the Cannes Film Festival jury. She was elegant but strong, soft-spoken but brave, a woman who shattered limits placed on her and helped shape the rights actors still have today. Her life wasn't perfect. She had 2 divorces, deep heartbreak, and a feud with her own sister that never healed. But through it all, she stayed true to her own voice. Her ashes now rest in Paris, but Olivia de Havilland's spirit will always live on in the characters she brought to life and the impact she made on the world of cinema. Audrey Mson, once hailed as America's first supermodel, a woman whose beauty was etched into stone across New York City, but whose final years were marked by heartbreaking loneliness and mental illness. Audrey passed away on February 20, 1996, at the age of 104, after spending 65 years confined in a psychiatric hospital, forgotten by the world that once worshipped her image. She had been diagnosed with depression and schizophrenia, committed by her mother on her 40th birthday, and never truly returned to public life again. After her mother's death in 1958, she had no visitors for more than 2 decades, living in obscurity until a distant relative found her again in 1984. Audrey died alone, buried in an unmarked grave, her once glamorous life reduced to silence behind asylum walls. Her tragic decline began long before her commitment. After becoming a sensation in the 1910s as a model for dozens of sculptures, her face was immortalized in public monuments, fountains, and buildings. She appeared in 4 silent films, becoming the first American actress to appear nude on screen in Inspiration 1915, and her daring choices broke boundaries in both film and art. But fame didn't protect her. Her life spiraled after being connected to a scandalous murder in 1919, when a doctor she lived with murdered his wife, claiming to be in love with Audrey. Though she denied involvement, the association tainted her image, and her modeling and acting opportunities vanished. She tried desperately to rebuild, publishing personal essays, searching for a husband, even staging publicity stunts, but her mental health continued to deteriorate. At one point, she attempted suicide by drinking mercury. Once a celebrated muse for the most respected American sculptors, Audrey ended up working as a ticket taker, abandoned by the art world she helped define. Born in 1891 in Rochester, New York, she was raised by her mother after her parents divorced and moved to New York City at age 17. She was discovered by chance while window shopping, which led to a dazzling career posing for the likes of Daniel Chester French and Isidore Conti. Statues of her still stand tall today across the city. The gilded civic fame above Manhattan's Municipal Building, the Angel on the Manhattan Bridge, and Columbia at the main monument in Central Park are all Audrey. But despite the fame of her likeness, she was stripped of identity, agency, and dignity by the very society that had once glorified her. She was outspoken about fair pay and respect for models, demanding recognition at a time when women were expected to be silent and decorative. In the end, it wasn't her nudity or boldness that destroyed her. It was the cruelty of a world that didn't know what to do with a woman who refused to stay in her place. Audrey Munson lived through the rise of modern art, the golden age of silent film, and the fall of Beaux Arts architecture. But more than anything, she lived a life shaped by being seen yet never truly known. Her death, quiet and forgotten, stands in painful contrast to the statues that still hold her face high above the streets, reminding us that sometimes the brightest stars burn out alone, and those who seem immortal can still be left behind. Iris Apfel, a legendary American businesswoman, interior designer, and late-in-life fashion icon, who passed away on March 1, 2024, at the remarkable age of 102. Her death, confirmed by her estate, was from natural causes, and she spent her final days peacefully at her home in Palm Beach, Florida, surrounded by her longtime caregivers. Though she had no children, she left behind a global family of admirers who found inspiration in her bold spirit and fearless individuality. Her final years were marked by quiet reflection and slowing down, especially after the passing of her beloved husband Carl in 2015. But she never lost her spark for creativity and self-expression. Iris had spent a lifetime creating a world of color, texture, and meaning, and even in her last decade, she remained a working-style muse, collaborating with fashion brands and making public appearances. She had a fall in her 90s while stepping on an Oscar DLA rent-a-gown, which led to hip surgery, but her sense of humor and resilience never faded. In her very last years, as she watched her museum-worthy collections being carefully packed and cataloged, she understood that everything in life was temporary. All things are on loan, she used to say. Iris was born on August 29, 1921, in Astoria, Queens, to a Jewish family rooted in the business of glass, mirrors, and fashion. As a little girl, she rode the subway into Manhattan, falling in love with Greenwich Village and collecting antique jewelry with a young, wide-eyed curiosity. During the Depression, her family made things out of scraps, sewing, gluing, painting, and it shaped her lifelong belief that style didn't come from money, but from imagination. Iris studied art history at NYU and worked as a copywriter before marrying Carl Apfel in 1948. Together, they launched Old World Weavers, a textile company that restored fabrics and furniture in the White House under 9 different presidents. Her eye for detail and passion for rare finds took her all over the world, hunting through markets and bazaars. But it wasn't until she was in her 80s that the wider world finally caught on to her genius. In 2005, when the Met's Costume Institute faced a last-minute exhibition cancellation, they turned to Iris's closet. What started as a raid on her wardrobe became a blockbuster show, Rara Avis, that turned this unknown interior designer into a global icon. From that moment on, Iris embraced her role as a geriatric starlet, showing that aging didn't mean fading away. With her enormous round glasses, stacks of bangles, and loud, joyful outfits, she became the face of countless campaigns, signed with image models at 97, and inspired millions through her book, her Instagram, and the documentary Iris. She believed in curiosity, in dressing with joy, in working hard, and in staying interesting. She taught that you didn't have to fit in, no matter your age. Her death marks the end of a century-long life lived entirely on her own terms. A woman who started with nothing, built a world of elegance and eccentricity, and made old age look like a playground instead of a prison. Iris Apfel wasn't just a woman of style, she was style itself, walking proof that life doesn't stop giving if you don't stop asking. Clare Dubb, an American actress whose life spanned an entire century and whose presence touched over 200 films, but whose final days were filled with quiet loneliness, fading health, and a slow retreat from the world she once lit up with elegance and grace. Clare passed away on August 1, 1993, in Los Angeles, just 1 month shy of her 101st birthday, from complications related to advanced age. Her body had simply grown too fragile after so many years. Her hearing had gone, and she had become increasingly weak in her final years. By the time of her passing, most of Hollywood had moved on, and many of those she once worked with were long gone. But a close circle of people like actor John Philip Law remained by her side, helping manage her estate and offering comfort in her last chapter. She spent those final years in quiet retirement, living modestly off smart real estate and oil investments, no longer active on screen but still holding memories of a dazzling career that began in the silent film era. Born Clara Violet Dubrovich on August 31, 1892, in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, she came from a mixed Irish and Croatian background, raised Catholic, and traveled by covered wagon across the American West with her mother and grandfather in 1897, one of the last generations to experience such a rugged childhood. Originally trained to be a nurse, Clare's journey into the world of acting began with a simple newspaper ad and a chance friendship with actress Billie Burke. That spark led her to star in silent films such as Anything Once, The Devil's Trail, and Dangerous Hours, often playing bold women, vamps, and strong supporting roles. She worked with Lon Chaney, Harry Carey, and appeared in films for major studios like Universal, building a reputation for her talent and beauty, with her auburn hair, brown eyes, and athletic grace. She did many of her own stunts and excelled in tennis, swimming, and golf. Her film roles became smaller with the rise of sound, and she eventually turned to helping other actors, working behind the scenes as an agent and even stepping in as a caregiver to close friend and Hollywood star Marie Dressler during her battle with cancer. That relationship later caused painful rumors and legal battles, leaving Clare emotionally wounded and further isolated when Dressler left her out of her will. Even though she once mentored stars like Richard Cromwell and stood in for legends like Ethel Barrymore, Clare's later years were quiet, her fame mostly forgotten, and her body slowly giving out with age. Despite all that, she never remarried after her early divorce and lived with dignity. Surrounded by plants she loved to care for and memories of a lifetime spent in front of and behind the camera. Her story is a reminder of how even those who once stood in the spotlight can fade into the shadows with time. But her work, her spirit, and her resilience deserve to be remembered. Clare Dubb's death marked the end of an era, an actress from the silent screen days who lived to see the dawn of modern cinema. And though the world may have grown quiet around her, her life was a full and extraordinary journey. Carla Leml, an American actress and dancer whose name might not be on every marquee, but whose presence shaped the earliest days of cinema and horror history. She died in her sleep at the age of 104 on June 12, 2014, at her home in Los Angeles, from natural causes linked to her age. Her final days were quiet, surrounded by memories of a world she helped create nearly a century ago. As her health slowly declined, but her mind remained sharp and full of stories she never stopped sharing. She was one of the last living actors from the silent film era, and when she passed, it truly felt like a door had gently closed on a piece of Hollywood history. Born Rebecca Isabel Laemmle on October 20, 1909, in Chicago, Carla moved to California as a child when her famous uncle, Carl Leml, founder of Universal Studios, brought the family west. Living inside Universal Studios from 1921 to 1937, She grew up literally on a film set, surrounded by monsters, movie stars, and legends in the making. Her passion for dance led her into the movies, and in 1925, she appeared as a ballet dancer in The Phantom of the Opera. Just a few years later, she made her mark in horror history by speaking the very first line in the iconic 1931 film Dracula, making her voice the first ever heard in a horror talkie. She only had a few lines, but they stayed with her for life, and with every fan who ever watched that eerie carriage scene through the Borgo Pass. After a handful of small roles, Carla stepped away from acting in the late 1930s and spent decades living privately, never marrying, and instead finding companionship with writer Raymond Caniff until his death in 1977. But she returned to public life later, not only acting in a few modern horror projects like Mansion of Blood, but also sharing her life story through books, documentaries, and interviews. Her 2009 book Growing Up with Monsters gave fans a peek into what it was like to grow up on the Universal lot among legends like Lon Chaney and Bela Lugosi. She was honored in her later years with awards and birthday celebrations attended by fans and fellow artists alike, including a tribute on her 100th birthday with Ray Bradbury and Sarah Karloff in attendance. Carla never had children of her own, but through her work and legacy, she left behind a huge family of admirers and friends who adored her. What made Carla so special wasn't just her connection to movie history. It was her joy in sharing it, her warmth, and her love for storytelling even into her 100s. She was a living bridge between the silent era and the modern age, and her death marked the quiet, gentle end of a beautiful, one-of-a-kind chapter in Hollywood story. Dorothy Dixon, the American-born stage star who became one of London's most beloved musical actresses, and who passed away on September 25, 1995, at the age of 102. She died peacefully in London of natural causes, with no illness or long struggle, just the gentle ending of a remarkable life lived through more than a century of history. In her final days, she was surrounded by quiet memories, having long retired from the stage but never forgotten by those who loved the golden era of theater. Dorothy's life was not marked by sudden tragedy, but by a slow and graceful fading after years of giving everything to the stage, the soldiers, and the stories that kept people going through war and hardship. Born on July 25, 1893, in Kansas City, her father was a journalist in Chicago, and by her early 20s, she had already started dancing on Broadway, eventually joining the Ziegfeld Follies. She married Carl Hyson, a ballroom dancer, and the two dazzled audiences before moving to London in 1921, where she became a star overnight in the Revue London, Paris, and New York. Her voice gave life to the song Look for the Silver Lining, which became her signature, and her golden hair, flawless beauty, and graceful charm made her a favorite with fans across generations. She played Peter Pan, danced like Thistledown according to critics, and starred in musicals like Sally, The Cabaret Girl, and Crest of the Wave, building a reputation that would last for decades. But her life wasn't only about applause and bright lights. She also gave back. During World War II, she organized the London Stage Door Canteen, offering Allied troops a place of comfort and joy during dark times. She never remarried after divorcing Carl Hyson, though she had deep relationships, including one with Malcolm MacDonald, son of the Prime Minister, who asked her to marry him in 1941. But she turned him down to stay in Britain and help the war effort. She later acted in plays like Red Letter Day and As Long as They're Happy, and even into old age, she was celebrated as a legend of the West End. Her bond with Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, lasted nearly a lifetime, starting backstage in 1923 and lasting all the way to her 80th birthday, where the Queen entered singing one of Dorothy's old songs. She lived to see her daughter Dorothy Hyson become a star of her own, and remained a cherished figure in theater circles until the very end. Dorothy Dixon didn't die in pain or with scandal or heartbreak. She simply lived for over 100 years, gave everything to her art, outlived nearly everyone from her time, and slipped away quietly, like the last note of a beautiful song. Patricia Morrison, an American stage and film actress who quietly left this world on May 20, 2018, at the age of 103, at her home in Los Angeles, from natural causes. She didn't suffer from any disease or tragedy in her final days, but simply grew old with grace, and eventually her body gave out after more than a century of living through some of the most iconic moments in entertainment history. Her death came not with headlines or loud fanfare, but with quiet reflection from those who remembered her strength, her voice, and her beauty. In her final years, she had stepped away from the spotlight and lived a calm, artistic life, spending her days painting and attending special tributes where fans would still recognize her dazzling eyes and signature long dark hair. Patricia had never married, never had children, but she filled the world with music, characters, and unforgettable performances. Born in Manhattan on March 19, 1915, to a playwright father from Belfast and a mother who worked in British intelligence during World War I, Patricia grew up surrounded by creativity and ambition. She studied acting and dance in New York and started her career as a young woman designing dresses while training to perform. She broke into Hollywood in the late 1930s and was often cast as the mysterious woman or femme fatale in films like Dressed to Kill, The Fallen Sparrow, and The Song of Bernadette. And although she was praised for her beauty and presence, the film industry often overlooked her depth and talent. Her biggest chance at film stardom came with Kiss of Death, where she played a wife who, after being assaulted, tragically takes her own life. But that powerful scene was cut due to censorship rules of the time. Heartbroken but not defeated, Patricia turned to the stage, and that's where her real star was born. In 1948, Cole Porter personally picked her to lead Kiss Me, Kate, and on that Broadway stage, she shined like never before. As Lily Vanessy, she gave life to songs like So in Love, Wonderbar, and the unforgettable I Hate Men, performing the role over 1,000 times. She later took over as Anna in The King and I opposite Yul Brynner, and became one of the most beloved musical theater actresses of her time. Even though she left Hollywood behind, Patricia made occasional TV appearances, performed into her 90s, and was still singing and making public appearances well past 100. When she turned 100 in 2015, she celebrated with fans and friends, showing that her spirit had never faded. Her death wasn't tragic in the dramatic sense, but it was deeply emotional for those who knew what she represented. The final breath of a golden age, a real connection to a time when movies were magical and theater was everything. She died peacefully in her home, with dignity, without pain, and with a legacy that stretches far beyond what the cameras ever caught. Patricia Morrison lived a life full of art, voice, and grace. And when she left us, it wasn't just a woman passing. It was the closing of a long, remarkable chapter in the story of American entertainment. Louise Rener, the gifted German-born film actress who made history as the first person to Louise Rener, a deeply gifted actress who passed away on December 30, 2014, at the age of 104, just 13 days before what would have been her 105th birthday. She died of pneumonia in her London apartment, the same place once lived in by Vivien Leigh. Her final days were quiet, far from the bright lights of Hollywood that once tried to define her. And though she had outlived most of her peers, her spirit remained strong until illness took her away. In the end, it was her lungs that failed her, not her heart or mind, which had carried a lifetime of passion, hurt, and memory. Louise's story isn't just about fame or awards. It's about someone who walked away from the spotlight because it tried to mold her into something she wasn't. She once said, "My source had dried up. When she told MGM she could no longer give them the performances they demanded, not because she lacked talent, but because her soul felt crushed under the weight of expectations." Born on January 12, 1910, in Dusseldorf, Germany, and raised in Vienna, Louise grew up in a world of revolution and hunger, with a father who was controlling and a mother who suffered quietly. At just 16, she ran away from home and threw herself into acting, joining the great Max Reinhardt's theater company, quickly rising as a star on the European stage. By 25, she was in Hollywood, dubbed The Next Garbo, and her second film, The Great Ziegfeld, earned her an Oscar for a single heartbreaking phone scene where she cried as she congratulated her ex-husband on marrying someone else. Just a year later, she won her second Oscar for playing a quiet, worn-down Chinese farmer's wife in The Good Earth. She was only 28 and had already made history. becoming the first actor ever to win back-to-back Academy Awards. But that fame came with a cost. Louise felt like a machine being used for profit, thrown into roles she hated, married to playwright Clifford Odets in a turbulent and lonely relationship, and crying so hard on the night of her second Oscar win that she had to circle the hotel before facing the cameras. She left Hollywood completely in the 1940s, saying they tried to destroy her after making her a star. Her second marriage, to publisher Robert Knittel, gave her some peace, and they had a daughter together. She lived a long, rich life in Europe, occasionally returning to the stage and screen, but never again seeking fame. She even turned down Fellini when she felt the role wasn't right. To the end, she stayed true to herself, raw, honest, and uncompromising. Louise Rener wasn't just a woman who won 2 Oscars. She was someone who walked away from an industry that didn't know what to do with her kind of brilliance. Her death marked the end of an era. She was the oldest living Oscar winner, the last breath of Hollywood's golden age. But more than that, her story reminds us that fame isn't everything, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is say no. Glynis Johns, a legendary British actress, singer, and dancer whose passing on January 4, 2024, at the age of 100, quietly closed a chapter on one of the last remaining stars of the golden age of Hollywood. She died of natural causes in a senior living home in Los Angeles, far from the stages and screens that once lit up with her charm, humor, and unmistakable voice. Her final days were peaceful, surrounded by care, but her long life had already been marked by many losses: her parents, all 4 of her husbands, and her only son Gareth, who died of a heart attack during cancer treatment in 2007. Despite those personal heartbreaks, Glynis kept her spirit intact and lived a full century, bringing joy and elegance to audiences across generations. Her death wasn't sudden, but it still leaves behind a deep emptiness for those who admired her grace, her voice, and her vibrant legacy. Born on October 5, 1923 in Pretoria, South Africa, she was raised in England by artistically gifted parents. Her father, a well-known actor, her mother, a concert pianist. By the age of 5, she was already dancing, and by 10, she was a ballet instructor. Glynis entered the world of film as a teenager and quickly gained attention in the 1940s with her roles in 49th Parallel and Miranda, becoming a sought-after name in British cinema. Her breathy, husky voice made her a standout on both stage and screen, and she was one of the few performers who could captivate audiences in both comedy and drama. She earned an Oscar nomination for her role in The Sundowners and won a Tony Award for her unforgettable performance in A Little Night Music, where she introduced the now classic song, Send in the Clouds, written just for her by Stephen Sondheim. But to millions, she was best known as the sweet and strong-willed suffragette mother in Mary Poppins, singing Sister Suffragette with a fire and pride that left a lasting impression. Glynis was more than just a performer. She was a survivor, navigating heartbreak, stage fright, failed marriages, and the crushing expectations of a male-dominated industry with grace and quiet rebellion. Even as her fame grew, she never let it define her. She starred in over 60 films and 30 plays, yet her light was always steady, never flashy. Her final years were spent in quiet retirement, outliving nearly all of her peers, yet never losing that sparkle of wit and strength. Her manager, Mitch Clem, described her as someone who powered through life with intelligence, wit, and a love for performance. With her passing, we lose not just a star, but a living link to a time when film and theater were made magical by personalities like hers, strong, elegant, and unforgettable. Glynis Johns left this world gently, but her voice, her performances, and her impact will echo long after. Marta Agarth, the radiant Hungarian actress and singer whose life spanned more than a century and whose voice touched millions, but whose final days came quietly and sadly on December 26, 2013, at her home in Rye, New York. She was 101 years old when she passed away from a heart ailment, just 2 years after her last performance at age 99. Her death wasn't sudden, but it carried the heavy silence of an era fading away, a voice that once soared over packed concert halls now gone forever. In her last years, she remained mentally sharp, still full of grace, warmth, and a soft strength, but her body grew tired. The same heart that had once been filled with songs and applause slowly gave out, and she slipped away, surrounded by her memories and legacy. Marta's story began in Budapest, born in 1912 to a banker father who played piano and a mother who had given up her own singing career, but recognized her daughter's talent early. By age 11, Marta was already on stage, her voice so beautiful and pure that people began calling her a child prodigy. She was just a teenager when she took over the lead in Emmerich Kalman's The Violet of Montmartre, instantly becoming a star. Her film career exploded in the 1930s, and she acted in over 40 films across Europe, singing in Hungarian, German, English, French, and Italian. During the filming of Mein Herr's Ruft nach der in 1934, she met the love of her life, the Polish tenor Jan Kipora. Their chemistry, both on and off stage, was electric. They became known as Europe's love pair, dazzling audiences across continents, especially in The Merry Widow, which they performed over 2,000 times together. But behind the glamour was hardship. Being of Jewish heritage, Marta and Jan fled Europe in 1938, escaping the Nazis and starting anew in America. They found success again on Broadway and in Hollywood, but the war had taken something from them. When Jan died in 1966, Marta was devastated. She stopped singing for years, her grief too deep to face the spotlight. Eventually, with gentle pressure from her mother and encouragement from her sons, she found her voice again, performing late into her 90s with that same sparkle in her eyes. Her comeback wasn't about fame, it was about the music that had always lived inside her. Even when her performances became fewer, she still took the stage when she could, offering her audiences not just music but memories of a golden age. She received countless honors from Austria, Germany, Hungary, and Poland, and even in her final years, she was still singing, still sharing, still learning. Her death marked the end of one of the longest and most unique careers in music and film history. Marta Agarth was not just a performer, she was a symbol of resilience, elegance, and timeless talent. Her voice may be silent now, but her legacy will always sing. Mary Ellis, a fearless British pilot who passed away quietly at the age of 101 on July 24, 2018, in her home on the Isle of Wight. Her death was due to age-related heart failure, and though it came without sudden drama, it marked the end of a truly extraordinary life that had touched the skies and challenged every expectation placed on women of her time. In her final days, Mary was still sharp, still independent, still driving to the local shops, still full of the fire that had carried her through wars and social barriers alike. Just a few months before her passing, she was seen smiling and chatting with young student pilots at an RAF celebration, inspiring a new generation even as her own time was quietly running out. Though her body had grown frail, her mind was bright, and her love for aviation never faded. Born Mary Wilkins in 1917 on a farm in Oxfordshire, she fell in love with flying as a little girl after a joy ride in a small plane. She earned her pilot's license by 17 and had dreams in her heart and wind in her hair long before the world thought it was acceptable for women to take flight. But when World War II broke out and civilian flying was banned, Mary's future in the sky seemed gone. That changed in 1941 when she heard a radio call for female pilots to join the Air Transport Auxiliary, a lifeline that changed everything. Mary joined without hesitation and spent the war delivering fighter planes and bombers across Britain, flying more than 1,000 aircraft, including 400 Spitfires and dozens of heavy Wellington bombers, often without radios or guidance, sometimes in fog or enemy airspace. She came close to death many times, once nearly colliding with another Spitfire in fog, another time being shot at over Bournemouth, but she kept flying. She became one of only 2 women trusted to fly Britain's first jet, the Gloucester Meteor. After the war, she kept working with the RAF and eventually became the first woman in Europe to run an airport, managing Sandown Airport for 20 years. Mary married fellow pilot Don Ellis in 1961 and lived the rest of her life in a house by the runway, never far from the sound of engines. Even in her 90s, she flew a Spitfire again, laughing in the cockpit like the girl she once was. But behind the stories and the medals was a woman who had to prove herself at every step, who was often met with disbelief just for being female. Ground crews once refused to believe she had flown a bomber alone and searched the plane for a hidden man. She faced those doubts with quiet strength and steely confidence. Her death wasn't in battle, but the sadness it left behind was deep, because we didn't just lose a pilot, we lost a piece of living history. A brave woman who defied every limitation placed on her, who showed the world that courage and skill have no gender. Her heart finally gave out, but not before it had given everything to the sky. Mary Ellis was more than a pilot. She was a symbol of freedom, grit, and the power of chasing your dreams until the very end. Plet Dubost, the beloved French actress who passed away on September 21, 2011, at the age of 100, due to natural causes, closing the curtain on one of the longest and most colorful careers in cinema history. In her final days, Paulette was no longer active on screen, but remained in the hearts of many, having recently been honored on national television just before her centennial, where she was seen dancing joyfully, still full of life despite her age. Her death came quietly in a Parisian suburb, surrounded by privacy and peace, a gentle end to a life that began in the glow of the Paris Opera when she was just 7 years old. Born Paulette Emma Marie de Planck in 1910, she was the 11th child in a lively Parisian household. Her mother a singer at the Opera Comique, her father a gas engineer, and it was her mother's name she eventually took, and her mother's love for the stage that shaped her future. Paulette started her journey in the arts as a ballet student and quickly moved into operetta and theater before finally stepping into cinema in 1931. What followed was a film career that stretched over 7 decades and more than 250 films, working with some of the greatest directors of all time: Jean Renoir, Max Ophüls, Marcel Carné, François Truffaut, and Louis Malle. Her most iconic role came in 1939 as Lisette, the playful chambermaid in Renoir's The Rules of the Game, a role that began as a minor part, but grew significantly during the film's production. Her natural charm, round face, and mischievous smile made her unforgettable, especially as she became the unexpected emotional heart of one of cinema's greatest masterpieces. During World War II, she refused a contract from 20th Century Fox in Hollywood and spent years in Morocco with her husband before returning to film. Over time, she moved into mature supporting roles, often playing barmaids, mothers, or hotel managers, yet always bringing a unique blend of warmth and wit. Off-screen, she lived a life just as vivid, frank, funny, and fiercely independent. She spoke openly about her struggles, her brief marriage that ended in divorce in 1944, and the strange turns of her personal life, from admirers like the infamous Stavisky to friendships with icons like Jean Gabin and Miss Dingett. Paulette continued acting into her 90s, never seeing herself as a star, but as someone lucky to have lived well by doing what she knew best. Her death may have been peaceful, but her life was anything but ordinary, a long, rich journey filled with laughter, tears, love, and legacy. Today, we honor her not just for the roles she played, but for the century she gave to cinema and the joy she brought to generations of audiences. Valerie Andre, the fearless French neurosurgeon, pilot, and war hero who passed away on January 21, 2025, at the age of 102, leaving behind a legacy that will never be forgotten. Her death was quiet, brought on by the natural limits of time, but the story of her final days was marked by a fading light in a body that had once braved war zones and machine gun fire just to save others. In her final years, Valerie lived in a retirement home in Issy-les-Moulineaux, France, surrounded by memories of a life that redefined courage, service, and sacrifice. Though her body had grown fragile, her spirit never wavered. She still watched game shows, greeted visitors with sharp wit, and carried that same determination that once pushed her into the skies above Vietnam and Algeria. But those last moments carried the quiet sadness of someone who had lived many lives in one and was finally ready to let go. Born in Strasbourg in 1922, Valerie fell in love with flying at the age of 10 after meeting the famous aviator Maurice Hilsch. By 16, she had her pilot's license, and by 1948, she had become a doctor, just in time to serve in the bloody French War in Indochina. As a young army surgeon, she saw firsthand how hard it was to reach wounded soldiers in the jungle. So she went back to France, learned to fly helicopters, and returned to fly 129 rescue missions under enemy fire, saving 165 soldiers. Sometimes she parachuted into dangerous areas just to perform emergency surgery on the spot. They called her the woman who came from the sky, and even enemy fighters respected her. She was not only a pilot, she was a lifeline. Later, in Algeria, she flew 365 more missions, bringing wounded men back from death's door, her helicopter often riddled with bullets. With over 3,200 hours in the air and countless lives saved, she became the first woman in French history to be promoted to general in the military in 1976. But even then, Valerie didn't stop. She pushed for women's equality in the armed forces and inspired thousands of young girls who dreamed of flying or wearing a uniform. She was decorated with the highest honors in France, including the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor, and even had a heliport named after her on her 100th birthday. But behind the medals was a woman who had seen war up close, who had fought not just against bullets and bombs, but against doubt, fear, and the idea that women didn't belong in combat. Her death was peaceful, but it marked the end of a chapter in history that most people will never fully grasp. Valerie Andre wasn't just a pilot or a surgeon. She was a lifeline in times of chaos, a trailblazer in a world that once told her no, and a hero who never asked for praise. Her life was filled with noise, war, and action, but her passing came with silence and the deep, lasting ache of knowing we lost someone irreplaceable. Her story will live on in the skies she flew, in the lives she saved, and in the young women she inspired to never accept limits. Valerie Andre lived as if fear didn't exist, and died having proven that one woman really can change the world. Barbara Kent, one of the last living stars of Hollywood's silent film era, whose death at the age of 103 on October 13, 2011, quietly marked the end of a generation that once lit up cinema's earliest screens. Her passing was not sudden or caused by illness, but was the gentle, inevitable result of old age. Her body simply wore out after more than a century of life, and in her final days at her peaceful home in Palm Desert, California, she grew weaker, fading slowly as those close to her said their goodbyes. It was a soft ending to a long, remarkable life, but for those who knew her story, her death carried the heavy weight of history. Barbara had long stepped away from public life and avoided the spotlight for decades, refusing interviews and living quietly while the world moved on. But she had once been a bright and daring figure in early Hollywood. Born Barbara Cloutman on December 16, 1907, in Gadsby, Alberta, Canada, she moved to California with her family as a child and caught the eye of Universal Studios in 1925 after winning the Miss Hollywood beauty pageant, despite having no acting experience. That same year, she was signed and launched into fame, first starring in the Western Prowlers of the Night before making a name for herself with her innocent yet strong performances in films like Flesh and The Devil alongside Greta Garbo. Her role in No Man's Law 1927, where she appeared to swim nude, actually wearing a skin-colored suit, stirred controversy and attention, earning her the title of Wampa's baby star. She was just under 5 feet tall, but had a screen presence that made her memorable, especially as Harold Lloyd's love interest in his first sound films, Welcome Danger and Feet First, during the uncertain transition from silent to talking pictures. She starred in Lonesome 1928, a film now considered one of the last great silent movies, and charmed audiences with her warmth and naturalism. But fame has always faded. She took a break after marrying talent agent Harry Eddington in 1932, hoping for a stronger comeback, but the industry moved on, and she quietly left acting altogether by 1941. When Harry died in 1949, Barbara stepped back further from public view, eventually marrying again in 1954 to Jack Monroe, who taught her to fly small planes. She remained active well into her 90s, golfing and even flying until her 85th birthday. But her final years were spent in privacy, outliving all her contemporaries and quietly holding the title of one of the last surviving stars from a time when film had no sound and emotion was everything. Her death didn't make headlines the way her films once did. But for those who knew her story, it was the end of something rare. Barbara Kent lived a full, beautiful life, with moments of fame, long stretches of peace, and the dignity of passing on her own quiet terms. The world may not remember every frame of her 35-film career, but they will remember that she was once the young girl who rivaled Garbo, braved the jump from silence to sound, and left behind a soft but lasting legacy. Leni Riefenstahl, the German filmmaker whose life was as complex as the films she created, and whose death at the age of 101 on September 8, 2003, quietly closed one of the most controversial chapters in cinematic history. In her final days, she was frail and in constant pain from advanced cancer, heavily dependent on painkillers, and barely strong enough to move. Just weeks after celebrating her 101st birthday at a quiet hotel near her home in Pocking, Bavaria, she fell seriously ill, and from that point, her health declined rapidly. The woman who once danced on mountain peaks, dived underwater with cameras in her 80s, and directed films that stunned the world, slowly faded from the world she had once dazzled. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at 10 p.m., far from the chaos and spotlight of the world that had once both praised and condemned her. Born Helene Bertha Amalie Riefenstahl in Berlin on August 22, 1902, she started her journey in the arts as a dancer, a passion she pursued against her father's wishes. A serious knee injury ended that dream, but a chance viewing of a mountain film inspired her to step into acting, and soon she became a star in German mountain films, performing dangerous stunts that would terrify most actors today. She eventually taught herself to direct, and in 1932 made her debut with The Blue Light, a visually stunning piece that caught the eye of Adolf Hitler. That meeting would define the rest of her life. Hitler saw her talent and gave her full control to film the Nazi Party's massive rallies, leading to her infamous works Triumph of the Will and Olympia. These films, despite their horrifying purpose, changed filmmaking forever with groundbreaking techniques like tracking shots and slow motion. But her closeness to Hitler and role in glorifying the Nazi regime destroyed her reputation after the war. Though she was never officially a Nazi Party member or charged with war crimes, the world never forgave her. She spent years trying to rebuild her life, facing arrest, lawsuits, and rejection from the film world. Later, she turned to photography, capturing images of African tribes and underwater life, still chasing beauty in a world that never fully welcomed her back. In her 90s, she survived a helicopter crash in Sudan and still kept working, even lying about her age to keep diving at nearly 100. But her past followed her to the grave. No matter how much she insisted she didn't know the truth about the Holocaust, her name remained forever tied to Hitler's propaganda machine. In her last years, she lived in isolation with her longtime partner Horst Kettner, rarely appearing in public, burdened by age and the shadow of her choices. And when she died, she left behind a legacy that is still debated to this day. Was she just an artist caught in history, or someone who helped shape one of its darkest moments? Leni Riefenstahl's life was filled with brilliance, ambition, denial, and controversy, but her death was quiet, far removed from the storm she once stirred.